when you are.
So let me get my slides up and I'll share screen. Mhm. Okay, can you see them? Can you see everything? Yes. Oh my goodness, there's Kathy. I know one person in the audience now.
Hello.
Hey. So
Hey
I'll
there.
get started. Let me pull this over here. All right, so you guys can still see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so my name is Charlotte Ferris. I am with the College of Pharmacy. So I teach students in their first, second, and third year in pharmacy school, which is graduate education. So these guys have already at least completed usually about 2 years of undergraduate. So our focus in the project that I'll talk to you guys about came through my participation in the AI learning community that I took part of in the past year, and really challenged us to look at how can we integrate this into the classroom to really challenge what we're doing and integrate generative AI, et cetera, and look at how it's showing up in the classroom. So what we did in our class was looked at ChatGPT and its ability to answer drug information questions and challenge that for our students to be able to detect errors, et cetera. So I'll walk through a little bit of the overview of the project and some lessons learned from integrating this into a second year pharmacy school classroom. I think it's important to start off with a little bit of context about the relationship between being a drug information master for the role of the pharmacist. It's a pretty key responsibility that we have. And when you look at what's on the slide, there's a lot of complexity in terms of what students and eventual pharmacists are doing in this capacity, right? When you look at the skill set that's here, it really takes students and eventual pharmacists having a pretty extensive knowledge base of medications, diseases. It requires them to be able to effectively navigate and search through the literature. And then over on that left-hand bottom side is really synthesize these large volumes of complex data pieces, make sense of it, and then get to that final recommendation that they communicate out to either a patient, another care provider, et cetera. So there's a lot of skills involved in being a drug information master as a pharmacist, right? So this is the skill base that we were looking at in this course. And when we look at it in the framework of something like a generative AI tool like ChatGPT, it can do a lot of these things, right? It can search the literature in some capacity, it can synthesize a lot of information, and it can attempt to communicate out this information for a patient or a targeted audience member, right? And really, in some ways, it also hits a pretty extensive knowledge base, but is often missing some context to put some of those pieces together. But it can do a lot of these same steps, right? So we have this skill and practice that pharmacists are expected to do. And we have this tool that has emerged in our faces, at least. It's probably been there in some capacity in various forms that can do a lot of this skill base in a way that we just haven't encountered before, right? So, what types of problems emerge when we look at this tool replacing the skills that are there are a lot of difficulties. There's some gaps in terms of what it can pull, right? So see a lot of incomplete searches, we see inaccuracies, we see fabricated data in all of these different steps of that process. And the consequence could potentially be is that when students in this realm are making recommendations to practitioners, is now they're making these recommendations, if they use this tool as their base, potentially based off of false or incomplete data, which in the healthcare world is a big deal, right? So we've got this skill base, we've got this tool that can potentially help us or potentially harm us in this process. And we have students engaging with this tool in various ways that are not always transparent to us in this process. So the research question in this area really became, how well can my second year pharmacy students recognize potential errors in a ChatGPT or some generative AI tool generated drug information question response, right? So how well can they identify issues with ChatGPT's ability to do their job? A little bit of context about who I'm working with in this course. The title of the course is Drug Literature Evaluation. It also has a patient education component to it. And it's a pretty large class size. So I have about 100 to 120 students in the course. And for this particular assignment, they were placed into groups of 4, which led to about 30 different groups taking this assignment. And it was done fairly early in the course. This activity was done in week 3. And the whole structure of how we approached the assignment was there was a lecture walking through some of the strengths and weaknesses of generative AI for drug information questions. And then they were given time to complete the assignment after some basic instruction on some strengths and weaknesses of the tool. The big learning goals for the assignment were focused on, can these students critically evaluate an AI generated response with a focus on accuracy and completeness, and giving them an opportunity to really reflect on AI's role and limitations in something like evidence based practice, where they're integrating that evidence to make decisions. This is a snapshot of the actual assignment that walks through similarly what I just mentioned, right? What were we trying to accomplish is getting them to actually identify both inaccuracies and strengths based on the generated response that they had to evaluate from ChatGPT. And basic questions. So, really getting them to provide qualitative responses to what was done well in each section of the drug information question response and what was inaccurate or incomplete in each section of the drug information question response. This is the assignment rubric that was utilized, and again was really focused on just their comprehensiveness and accuracy of the assessment that was done, with their ability to provide that with some level of clarity and organization. So big, keeping in mind that a lot of the data that was coming out of this was their written evaluation of each of these sections that you see up in front of you. So there's kind of a background section that communicates a good amount of knowledge about either the disease or the drug. And the main thing they noticed in that section was there was fairly limited detail. So more finesse that could be added to the response that would have provided more context for the reader. So limited detail in the background section, which of course could probably be modified by modifying their prompt and getting more detail into the prompt that they had created. They did luckily notice that the search strategy was missing information, missing important data that should have been pulled into the response, which is a key to the section about the search strategy, is making sure that it's complete and also accurate. So they noticed that information was missing, but they didn't notice much about difficulties in or limitations in the accuracy of the information. And that's a theme in another section that'll draw us to. For the summary of the data, so this is where we are looking at what did they find, or what did ChatGPT find in its search, and what is it communicating about what it found. And just like the background section, they felt like this was limited in terms of the depth and detail that was provided in the response. And they also noticed that it was missing some key information that's pretty pertinent detail to help understand importance of the information that's provided there. So statistical data was missing from the response. Some key trials were missing from the response. So again, they're noticing that information is missing and that there was a limited amount of depth or detail to really understand context of the response. finally, we get to the references section, and this was the most surprising and painful for me to see was that few groups actually evaluated that section for accuracy. They just noted, oh, there's references here and they're in the appropriate citation format, but they didn't really check for accuracy. And same kind of back to that search strategy as they weren't really checking for the accuracy of the information. Was this resource making up information? So overall, what we found was they noticed limited detail was a big kind of recurring theme that they picked up on, limited depth of information that was conveyed, and missing information. So key pieces of information that were missing, but in both the search strategy and the references section, students really did not note accuracy issues. So false information, fabricated information was not noted in some key sections from very few groups. And again, this was 30 groups of about 100 students. So very few groups actually identified that there were issues with the accuracy of the information versus the depth and detail of the information that was presented. So a few things that were learned, and some of this comes from after the assignment and walking through the remainder of the course, because this assignment took place pretty early before they were asked to do some of these drug information question responses themselves. And there was a lot of them noted they had a high variability of the baseline knowledge of the tool to begin with. So this assignment really increased their awareness, especially of the tool's limits through that targeted lecture that we did, and then through the assignment, which showed them some of the weaknesses of the tool itself. So there was some gain in general awareness of the tool limits. It also gave us an opportunity to discuss how to responsibly use AI in this context, which is really important because I think there's been a lot of faculty that have said don't use it rather than walking them through how to responsibly use it. So we see a lot of students exit our curriculum using this tool, but not really recognizing those limits, which is really key and important. And finally, a big takeaway was not evaluating that reference integrity, that accuracy of information, which highlights something that really needs to be reemphasized in the next edition of this course um, as we walk through delivering this again in the spring. I think next steps in reflecting on what was done and what to do differently when this course again is done in spring of 26. I think I would like to create more structure for students to find specific errors. I really left it open for them to write in their general thoughts about what was happening well and what wasn't happening well. So they didn't really identify a lot of specific errors. They spoke more generally about what was wrong with the response rather than identifying those specific pieces. So I think I want to create more structure for students to actually find targeted errors that also allows them to think more generally what it's not doing well. I think I would also like to integrate it into more assignments. That way they have practice with the tool and how to use it responsibly rather than just looking at one output and providing their commentary and then kind of walking on to the rest of the course. So I think more integrative longitudinal practice would allow them to gain more comfort and more strength in using the tool responsibly. And I think also, as a college, we need to continue to clarify responsible use policy because I had questions throughout the course. Can I use this tool to rephrase some of the way that I'm writing? English is not my first language. So I had several students that wanted to use it for help with just general writing. And I hadn't really clarified to that depth what was appropriate in terms of responsible use in the course. So I think that responsible use policy probably needs to be updated and clarified for them if I'm going to integrate it throughout the course in more assignments. So those were the big takeaways. I know we had a limited time to go over the study, and I know I had some audience members show up towards the end. So happy to review or answer any questions about the pieces of the study or things to do moving forward.
Charlotte, I have a question. Uh, did the students arrive at different answers to the drug information questions, or were the answers pretty consistent? Did you see the same references over and over again?
So how the assignment was structured, Kathy, was they were given a fully generated response and they were asked to evaluate the response that was generated. So they didn't actually use AI to create a response. They evaluated AI's ability to generate the response.
Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I missed that.
Sorry. No, you're fine.
No, that was a smart way to set it up.
But I think, kind of in reflection though, Kathy, is that I think they also needed practice with playing with the tool themselves in a future assignment to actually try to generate a response. I think that would have allowed them maybe a little bit more depth in their reflection. But I still am worried about the accuracy piece. The fact that they were not checking the accuracy of the information. And I don't know that that's unusual for novice learners who don't really know what the base knowledge is to kind of test, is this accurate or not?
Right. Yeah, I think that the piece about the references not checking that, I feel like that's very low hanging fruit. So it's
Oh,
kind of surprising that something that's so really easy, I think, to check and verify wouldn't have been the first thing they went to. That's interesting.
yeah, I know. Honestly, I think it's because it's gently tedious, a tedious task to do. And I think because it was tedious, they may not have actually checked that piece. They just kind of tossed their general commentary out there.
Right.
Also, Charlotte, I had this question. So when you looked into the data, like what worked well and like what didn't work well for them, did you like before doing that, like during your so it's a two-part question. So first one is like when you wanted them to look into like critically into this assignment, did you like give them like any task list or like to-do list? Like these are the things like accuracy is one of them, or like depth or like the breadth of what the ChatGPT is producing to look for that, or like and also the second question is like when they did reflect on the whole thing, did they have any recommendation for next time? So sorry, it's a long question.
No, those were good questions. So let me see if I can get to some of them. So, the first question about kind of providing a little bit of structure for how they approach their evaluation, I think that was one of my reflections after doing it, is I gave the lecture, which gave a little bit of that structure, but when they approached the assignment, it was clear they didn't use it. And it was very general in terms of what their evaluation was. It's like, oh, they're missing these, there's some missing depth. And they didn't really clarify what about the response was missing based on how I structured the assignment. So I think I would create more specificity in what they are looking for, so that they can really identify targeted pieces of information. And I like that idea of like a checklist almost of what do you evaluate for these things. Is the information completely accurate? Where is the inaccurate information? Highlighting that and maybe showing what it should be. Something like that, like what the response was and what it should be, or a corrected response almost. Yeah. Okay, I forgot what your other questions were. So I know one of them was reflecting on, from the student perspective, if they had any suggestions.
Yes, yes, that was the second question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of interest in how to actually use it, and what they in ways that they should and shouldn't use it. We talked a little bit about it and they evaluated that response, but they got a little bit of practice, but it wasn't really intentional in terms of like everybody grab ChatGPT or a selected resource and let's create a search strategy for answering this question. And we did that through targeted ways and various assignments and different things. So, like, Kathy is in the course with me, and they did a little bit of that in the search, both the search strategy and developing a question. But I don't think I did a great job continuing it through some of the harder parts, which is the summary of all that complex information, as well as the recommendation, which is, to me, is possibly one of the scarier spots to use it.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thanks.
response.
Yeah, great question.
Other question or concern?
I'm wondering about the use of open evidence and if you're
Yeah.
seeing that in the course. And, this was with ChatGPT, but just your general thoughts about that.
I think, yeah, I have many thoughts about that, Kathy, because on rotation with me, so students in their fourth year, I am seeing them use. I haven't seen a lot in front of me use ChatGPT, but they're using a lot of the AI summary on their Google searches, and I've seen some use open evidence because that's been tossed their way as kind of a better way to go about answering drug information questions. So I would be curious how that alters their responses. And I can't remember. I think, do you have to set up an account with open evidence to start just like anything?
You do. There's a certain number of limited, you're allowed a certain number before you have to sign up, but you do have to have an account and you have to have a provider ID number actually in order to
Yeah.
get an account with open evidence. We've been tinkering with it at the Medical Sciences Library for sure and sort of comparing notes. There's also another tool called Consensus that has a medical mode that we're also um, exploring at the Medical Sciences Library as well, and kind of comparing the responses of the two. My colleague Lauren is in this meeting, so she can speak about that maybe if you want to, Lauren, not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's okay. I came a little late, so I feel like I missed a little bit. But I mean, like Kathy was saying, we've been doing a lot of playing around with consensus and trying to figure out how we can best teach students. Um, if they're going to use AI, what is the best way to do it, or the most ethical way, or just things to think about because we want them to be critical consumers of information. And that requires us to learn about these tools and know how to use them ourselves.
Yeah. I honestly think that's been part of the biggest barrier is everyone being suppressed for time for all their responsibilities. And it is difficult for us in this space to gain enough comfort with the tool to be able to feel confident to teach other people how to use it responsibly. Despite the fact that I think my group is slowly moving towards feeling like that is an important responsibility for us is teaching responsible use. Um, you know, it requires some growth mindset for us and time and energy to place into learning about these tools enough to where we feel confident to be able to talk to students about it. So I've seen that as a big barrier to it being integrated into the classroom in general is our own comfort level with these tools to be able to get other people to use it. And I'm still seeing people say don't use it at all, which unfortunately I don't feel like is realistic, but I do still hear and watch people say don't use this at all, as well as Google. I mean, like base search, which I know many students still use as their base for answering medical questions, is starting with Google.
Yeah, I think so too, especially when you consider, like, as Kathy and I work with med students or students who work with patients directly and are in settings where they're having conversations about potential diagnoses, the patient is going to go and use Google or use ChatGPT or whatever free source is available to them. So we should know how to use and consume that information that is output from those tools.
Mhm. Yeah. And I should go back to I should have also presented my data where, 2 years ago at the start of this big wave, I asked my students if they were familiar with these tools, and I had a very low percentage that had even engaged with it. It surprised me that so few had engaged with it at that point in time. And now, even 2 years later, the number is just greatly increased as people have engaged with it. A lot of my students still don't know how to use it well. I think a
Yeah.
pretty high percentage don't know how to use it effectively, or responsibly probably, but at least effectively. But I think I have about 30% of our pharmacy users that are consistent users or have integrated it in some capacity on a moderately consistent basis. And that's just a P2 level, so second year level.
I think students don't realize that these AI tools rely so heavily on open access and what that means. It may be the information is much older than what is still behind a paywall. So that's, a concern that we've talked about in our group for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they didn't pick up on that fully. I think they gathered that information was missing from the response, um, which probably is a piece that happens because of the open access part. But yeah, that's a big deal for us in answering drug information questions. Kind of a hard thing for students too to know, is my search complete when they're at a novice level, to really know and understand, when is my search done.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, like, I'm not sure which, like, what level the students are, and also like the familiarity to work around with AI. So that might be something to also consider as well, I think, in this case.
Yeah. And I could probably gather more kind of like before and after data about almost like maybe presenting myths and having them identify the myths about the tool, before, and then engage with a curriculum that hopefully increases responsible use and get some information after to see how well they're able to kind of, or just what myths are out there that they don't know about the tool. What's their basic understanding of the tool? I think that might be nice to capture at the beginning, is what is their basic understanding? What do they know about the limitations, etc.
Any final thoughts from anyone?
Thank you for sharing your work with us. This was interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for coming, you guys.
Looking forward to talking about it more.
Yeah.